Have you ever read something so raw, so honest, that it feels like the writer is whispering right into your soul, even if they wrote it decades ago, surrounded by mud, death, and the sound of distant bombs? This is one of those things. These are not battle reports, not strategy plans, not cold historic facts typed in military documents. These are letters, letters written by hands that trembled not only from the cold of the trenches, but from fear. Letters soaked in rain and sometimes even in blood, notes folded and hidden inside boots, pockets, helmets, carried with hope despite a world on fire. In the chaos of World War II, millions of soldiers clung to one fragile thing, the power of a message, a page, a few words, a letter that could cross oceans and front lines, a letter that said, "I'm still here," or sometimes, "I may not be when you read this." Let's begin with Private James Turner, a 21-year-old American from Nebraska. He wasn't a poet, wasn't a writer. He worked in a small hardware store before the war. His handwriting was clumsy, with ink blots on every line, but the letter he wrote from a foxhole in Belgium, that was a masterpiece of pain and longing. "Mom, I dreamed I was home. I could smell your pancakes. I could hear you humming in the kitchen like you always did. I woke up crying because the only thing I smelled was smoke and wet earth. I don't know how much longer I'll be here, but if I don't come back, know that I left with the memory of our breakfast table in my heart." Can you imagine being the mother who received this letter? You're at home, maybe folding laundry, maybe boiling water for dinner, when the envelope arrives, and as your fingers open it, your whole body trembles, not from the words, but from what might not be said next, the unknown, the silence that follows. This is what these letters carry, not just ink, but echoes. Echoes of men who didn't know if they'd live to send another. Some wrote with anger, others with humor. Some tried to protect the ones they loved by not telling the whole truth, like Corporal Ernesto Ruiz, a Mexican-American stationed in Italy. His letters to his little sister were full of jokes. "I met a chicken today who was braver than half the men in my unit. She refused to leave the road during shell fire. Just stood there, clucking at the sky like it owed her something." His sister, Maria, later said, "I was 9, and I thought my brother was having fun. I didn't know that the day before he wrote, that half his platoon had been wiped out. Do you see what I mean? These were not just messages, they were shields. Shields made of paper and ink, meant to protect the people back home from the horror the soldiers were living. But sometimes the shields cracked. Take the case of Friedrich Adler, a German soldier from Munich. His letter was never sent. It was found decades later inside his boot, buried in the snow of the Eastern Front. If anyone finds this, know that I never believed in this war. I just wanted to live, to marry Anna, to open a bakery and forget the sound of gunfire. Tell my mother I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to avoid this. This is the voice of a man at the edge, not a hero, not a villain, just a human being, trapped." And then there are the letters of silence. Yes, letters that say nothing, and yet say everything. One French nurse, Camille Dufour, kept every letter from a soldier she never met. He wrote to her hospital in Normandy every week. He never signed his name, never told his story. Each letter had a single sentence. "I'm still alive. Thank you for your work." No return address, no personal detail, just that line. Until the letters stopped, Camille kept them until she passed away in 1987. In her will, she wrote, "He may not have known my face, but I knew his soul, because only someone who has seen death values life this much." And it's true. In the middle of the mud, surrounded by rats and explosions and hopelessness, these men and women clung to life through words. They held pens like weapons. They used paper like prayer. Some letters were never meant to be read. Some were confessions. In 1945, a Polish resistance fighter named Alexei Nowak wrote a letter to his brother in Krakow, but instead of sending it, he buried it beneath a church tile in Warsaw. "I shot a man today. I don't know his name. He looked younger than me. He looked like he was about to say something, but I fired first. I can't stop seeing his face. I can't sleep. I'm writing this so I don't forget how human he looked." Years later, that letter was found during renovations. It had never reached anyone. And yet, it reached everyone who read it after. Now let me ask you something. How many feelings can fit inside a page? Hope, regret, love, terror? All of them. Because sometimes words were the only freedom left. Picture this. A 19-year-old girl named Emilia from Naples, hiding in a cellar with her grandmother while bombs fell. She didn't fight in the war, she didn't carry a gun, but she wrote letters to a soldier named Marco, letters she never sent because Marco had died a year before. She wrote them anyway. Marco, the fig tree outside, bloomed again. Nonna made your favorite soup, and we lit a candle like we used to. I still talk to you in my dreams. Are you listening from somewhere? Later, those letters were found tucked inside the bricks of her home. Her granddaughter donated them to a museum, not because of historical value, but because, as she said, they're proof that love doesn't obey war. So here we are. Reading these letters not to mourn, but to remember, not to glorify war, but to understand its cost. Every scribbled line, every water-stained paper, every desperate word is a monument, not of victory, but of survival. And let's not forget, some of these writers were just kids, 17, 18, boys pretending to be men. Girls growing old too fast. They didn't write history books, but their words are history. History carved in ink, on scraps, on anything they could find. In the end, war tries to silence. But these letters, they scream of humanity, in a time when being human was the most dangerous thing of all. So maybe the question isn't what they wrote. Maybe the real question is, are we still listening? Letters from the trenches, real words of emotion, longing, and fear. It's strange, isn't it? How something so fragile, just a sheet of paper, some ink, maybe a fingerprint, can carry the full weight of a man's heart. Can echo louder than artillery. These aren't just letters. They're time machines. They bring us closer not to the history of war, but to the humanity inside it. The part that isn't found in textbooks or documentaries. And as we open this second chapter of stories, it's not medals or military ranks we're chasing. It's trembling hands, crumpled envelopes, sentences that were supposed to remain private but somehow survived the battlefield. Let me begin with Private Harold Thompson. He was an American paratrooper, just 23 years old, dropped into the chaos of Normandy on D-Day. In his breast pocket, he carried three things: a photo of his wife, Emma, a tiny leather-bound Bible, and a letter addressed simply, "To my son, if I never return." That letter was never mailed. It was found years later, sealed inside a rusted canteen buried under the soil of a French field, preserved by accident, or maybe by fate. This is what it said. "My boy, you're too young to read this now, but if someday this finds you, I want you to know, your father wasn't a hero. I was scared, every second, but I kept going forward because I believed in the world you'd grow up in, a world without this. A world with sunlight and baseball games and laughter that doesn't come from nervous relief. If I don't come home, just know, I never stopped thinking about your first birthday. That's what got me through the night. I don't know about you, but those words hit harder than any explosion ever could. Because that's the real story of war. It's not just bullets and flags. It's the sound of a pen scratching across paper while death waits outside the door. Now let me take you to a different front, to the frozen trenches of the Eastern Front, where cold wasn't just a condition, it was a killer. Tatiana Petrovna was 17, a Russian field nurse. She had already seen more blood than most doctors would see in a lifetime, and yet, every night she wrote a letter. Not to her parents, not to a commander. To her fiancé, Ivan Ivan had died 2 months earlier in a bombing. She knew that, but she kept writing. "Dear Ivan, today I gave my bread to a child with no shoes. He didn't speak, just looked at me like I was a ghost. Maybe I am," I told him about you. I told him you were strong and kind and that you once held my hand until I stopped crying. I think he understood. Tatiana wrote 102 letters after Ivan's death. She never stopped addressing them to him, and she never stopped believing he was reading them somewhere. We don't know where those letters went. but we know one was found. Decades later, hidden inside a hollowed-out medical book, a soldier found it and said, "I've read hundreds of war letters. This one didn't speak of death. It spoke of love so strong even death couldn't interrupt it." That's what these letters are, interruptions, moments frozen in time. They're the heartbeat of people who refuse to become statistics. Let me tell you about another. A German mechanic named Otto Weiss. He wasn't a soldier by choice. He was drafted, just like millions of others. And on his first week in France, he wrote home to his younger sister Clara, but he didn't talk about war. "Dear Clara, I saw a horse today. She was alone in a field, eating wildflowers. I stood there for 20 minutes just watching her. There was no sound, no shouting, just peace. I thought maybe the world forgot that peace still exists, but the horse remembered, and now I do too." The letter ends there. Simple, beautiful. It was found in Clara's photo album after she died at 91. She had kept it all her life, even as her house changed, even when the ink faded to a soft blue. Why? Because when the world around you is screaming, even a whisper of beauty becomes sacred. There's another whisper I want to share. A French soldier named Louis Morel, writing from Verdun, 1944. He sent a single page to his younger brother back, in Marseille. "Do you remember the apricot tree by Grandma's house? I had a dream last night that I climbed it again, but when I reached the top, the branches turned into rifles, and when I looked down, the ground was gone." That's all it said. One paragraph. But in that paragraph, everything. Fear, memory, the surreal horror that war burns into the mind. Now, I want to ask you something. What would you write if you thought it might be your last letter? Would you confess? Would you say something you were too afraid to say out loud? Would you try to make someone laugh just one more time? That's what Corporal Daniel Everett did. British soldier, 20 years old, stationed in North Africa. He wrote to his best friend, and the letter begins like this. "Mate, if you're reading this, it means I'm probably busy haunting you right now." It was a joke, followed by a story about how Daniel had lost his boots and had to walk in sandals for 2 days. Then it takes a turn. But seriously, if this is the end, I want to say something real. I was scared. Not of dying, but of being forgotten. So if you ever get married, name your dog after me. That way, every time you call it, I'll come running in your memory. And his friend did exactly that. A golden retriever named Danny lived 13 years, loved everyone. These are the things war doesn't erase. The ridiculous, the human, the soft, edges inside a hard world. Now, not all letters were found in perfect shape. Some were soaked in mud, burned at the edges, illegible in places. But even those fragments, half a sentence, a name, a date, are treasures. There was a note found inside a helmet in Okinawa. No name, just this. "If someone finds this and I didn't make it, tell Sarah I smelled the ocean before I died, and I wasn't afraid. That's it. But somehow, it's everything." We like to think that war is about winning or losing, but these letters show us the truth. For the people inside it, war is about remembering, holding on, leaving something behind, just in case they don't come back. And maybe that's why we're still reading them, decades later, translating, preserving, whispering them across time, because they weren't meant for us, but somehow they became ours. Every time we open one, we become the other half of the story, the reader, the witness, the last person standing, holding a letter that should have never had to be written, but was, because someone needed to say, "I was here." And we hear them. We hear them in the scratch of a fountain pen, in the pause between two sentences, in the silence where a name used to be, and now that we've heard them, the real question is, what will we do with what they gave us? Sometimes the hardest part isn't dying in war, it's surviving it, coming back home with the body intact but the soul shredded. And what do you do with all those memories, with the weight of what you saw, what you did, what you couldn't? Stop? Many soldiers wrote letters not to say goodbye, but to try to keep themselves together. to glue their own minds back with ink and words, as if writing was the only way to stay human. One of those men was Sergeant Miguel Herrera, Spanish volunteer in the Allied forces. He fought in Italy and later in France. But his most powerful letter wasn't written from a battlefield. It was written from a hospital bed. He had been wounded by shrapnel, leg torn open, but he survived. While recovering, he wrote to his brother in Madrid. Every time I close my eyes, I see fire. Not just from bombs, but in the eyes of the men next to me. Some of them burned from the inside long before the flames touched their skin. I ask myself, how do I return to being someone who laughs at the sound of music, who sleeps without a rifle under the bed? He ends the letter with a chilling sentence. I didn't die in the war, but something inside me did. This is what many veterans tried to explain when the noise was gone and silence came back. The silence that isn't peace, but a constant echo of what they lived. Take, for example, Private Edward Collins, American, who never spoke about the war to his family. Not a word. But decades later, after his death, a shoebox was found in the attic. Inside, medals, a photo, and unsent letters. Letters, he wrote to himself. Yes, to himself. Dear Eddie, one began, I know you're pretending to be okay, but I was there with you in that trench. I saw what you saw. I remember the boy who cried for his mother as the sky fell on us. Don't bury that, Eddie. Don't forget him. Each letter was like a conversation between the version of him that survived and the version that stayed behind, forever stuck in the mud and blood of the front lines. Sometimes writing was the only way to forgive themselves, not for what they did, but for not being able to save everyone. Another man, Lieutenant Akira Tanaka, Japanese, wrote a diary that would only be found in the 1970s, hidden beneath floorboards in a rural home. In one entry, he writes, Today, I gave water to a dying enemy. He looked younger than my nephew. His lips were cracked, his eyes lost. He tried to speak but couldn't. I held his head up and helped him drink. He smiled, and then he died. Akira ends that day's note with, I don't know his name, but I will remember his face more than any victory I was told to celebrate. That's the thing war teaches. The face of an enemy can look like your own, can have a smile, can have fear, can have humanity. And when you realize that, something breaks, something that doesn't come back. Many letters talk about this. The quiet brotherhood between enemies who never exchanged names, but shared the same sky, the same cold, the same fear. A Polish soldier named Marek, captured by the Germans, wrote a letter while in a POW camp. It was addressed to his daughter, My sweet Zofia, today a German guard gave me a piece of apple. Just that, a slice. He didn't speak, just placed it in my hand and walked away. I haven't eaten fruit in months. I closed my eyes and thought of you biting into apples at our kitchen table, the juice on your chin. That moment, between him and me, it didn't erase the war, but it reminded me that men are not born enemies. They're taught to be. This is a line we can't forget. Men are not born enemies, they are taught, and maybe letters like these are small rebellions against that teaching. There's another story I want to share. Anna Major, Dutch resistance. She wasn't a soldier. She was a librarian, but she helped hide Jewish families, carried messages for the underground, and once forged 12 identity cards in a single night. She was eventually caught. Before being sent to a prison camp, she wrote a letter to her younger sister. In case I don't return, don't cry for me. I lived with purpose. I lived every day knowing I was fighting darkness, not just with weapons, but with words, with courage, with silence when it was needed, and with loud defiance when silence was no longer enough. That letter was smuggled out by a sympathetic guard. Her sister kept it hidden in the spine of a book for over 40 years. Anna never returned, but her words, they survived everything. They remind us that even those who never held a rifle also fought, that resistance doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a dress, holds a pen, whispers instead of shouting, but resists all the same. These letters, scattered through time, show us that even in the darkest places, people were trying to hold on to light. And that's what this block is about. It's not the letters of death, but the letters of survival, of trying to come back, of remembering who you were, of forgiving yourself, or at least trying to. Letters that ask the question, if I return, will I still be me? And the answer, most of the time, was no. But they wrote anyway, because maybe, just maybe, putting the words on paper kept the old self alive, just long enough to remember why they went in the first place. Not to kill, but to protect. To defend a future that could still have music, and birthdays and the laughter of children in backyards. So we read these letters not just to feel sorrow, but to feel connection, to hear the voice of someone who walked through hell, and still found something human to say. And if they could do that, maybe we can too. The war ended, but peace didn't arrive for everyone. For many, the silence that came after the guns stopped was louder than any explosion. No more bombs, no more orders, no more cries from comrades, just a suitcase, a train ticket, and a return to a home that was no longer the same because they were no longer the same. And that's where the Second War began, not the one of trenches or bullets, but of memory, of nightmares, of trying to explain to your child why you cry at night, of trying to smile at the dinner table while your mind is still stuck in a field filled with screams. Many veterans didn't talk. They couldn't, but they wrote. And in those writings, they left clues, puzzles, of what it's like to live after the unimaginable. Like Captain Jean Morel, French resistance fighter. He returned to Paris after the war, but Paris didn't return to him. He wrote this to a friend. Every street reminds me of someone who's not here anymore. I walk past cafes where we once laughed, and now I feel guilt. Guilt for surviving. Guilt for still being able to smell coffee, hear music, kiss my wife. I wonder, do the dead envy the living, or do the living envy the dead? This feeling has a name, survivor's guilt, a quiet war that rages inside the chest, and some tried to silence it with writing. Another man, Sergeant Thomas Green, American, returned to his farm in Iowa. He wrote letters to his son, who was just a baby when he left. In one letter, he says, "Today I taught you how to hold a fishing rod." Your tiny hands struggled and I laughed, but then for a moment I saw another pair of hands, dirty, shaking, covered in blood. Hands I held in the trenches as the boy begged me not to. Let him die. I blinked, and you were back, safe, smiling. But I wonder, son, will you one day read this and understand the weight your father carried just to be able to smile again? That's the invisible scar, the war you carry in silence. For some, returning home was just a change of scenery. The war followed them, tucked inside their memories. One man, Nikolai Vetrov, Russian tank commander, returned to a village where no one recognized him. Thin, eyes hollow, haunted, he began a journal. Today I tried to hold my wife, but I froze. Her perfume reminded me of the smoke in Stalingrad. Not the same scent, but the same sting in my eyes. She looked at me like I was a stranger, and maybe I am. Maybe the man she loved never left the battlefield. How many returned like that? Ghosts inhabiting their own bodies, some sought redemption through rebuilding. Like Eva Szabo, a Hungarian nurse who tended to wounded soldiers on both sides. After the war, she opened a small clinic in a destroyed village. She wrote, "I've sewn up skin, but I cannot sew up souls. A boy came in today with a scar across his face. I cleaned the wound, but what hurt more was when he whispered, 'Why did they hurt me?' I had no answer. I still don't. Others turned to teaching, telling the next generation, don't let this happen again. Like Paulo de Andrade, Brazilian soldier who fought in Italy. He became a school teacher. He told his students, I once saw a friend's heart stop in my arms. Not because of lack of love, but because of too much hate around us. Learn history, read it, talk about it, so that no one else dies like that again." Some survivors wrote not about war, but about love. Like the anonymous poem found in a German soldier's pocket, dated 1945. I saw you in a dream walking through fields of wheat. No blood, no fire, no gun in your hand. Just peace beneath your feet. If I die before I hold you, let these lines be my kiss, carried by wind, by hope, by time, to a world better than this. These lines, scribbled in a crumbling notebook, survived more than the man who wrote them. They survived because someone picked it up, read it, felt it, and chose to keep it. That's what happens with these letters. They don't just belong to the writer. They belong to us. They are passed down, not just as documents, but as emotions, as living reminders that behind every statistic, every uniform, every cross in a military cemetery, there was a person, with dreams, with fears, with someone waiting, for them to come back, or at least to write one last time. And sometimes that letter is the only thing that came back, one final voice echoing through time. As we read these stories, one truth becomes clear. The war may have ended, but for many the battle to be whole again never did. Yet they fought. They fought to smile again, to walk without looking over their shoulder, to sleep without screams, to forgive themselves for surviving. They fought to live. And maybe, just maybe, that fight was the bravest of all. The war is over, the soldiers are gone, but their words remain, letters written in blood and ink, words carved in the silence between bombs, hopes wrapped in paper, crossing oceans, reaching people who waited, or never had the chance to. These letters are not just memories, they are mirrors. Mirrors of the human soul under extreme pressure. And maybe that's why they still touch us so deeply, because they don't just talk about war, they talk about love, about absence, about faith, about the pain of not knowing if tomorrow will ever come. Like the letter of soldier Lucas Bianchi, Italian, who fought in the Apennines. He wrote to his mother, "Mama, I'm sorry for every time I left my plate half full, for every morning I forgot to kiss your cheek. I didn't understand what it meant to miss someone until I smelled tomato sauce in a dream, and cried when I woke up." This letter was found in his jacket pocket. He never made it back, but his mother received the envelope. Torn, stained, but real, and for her, that was enough to say goodbye. These are not war stories. They are life stories told from inside the war, voices of people who had no choice but to be brave. Like Maria Teresa, a Portuguese nurse who volunteered in field hospitals in France. In her letter to her fiancé, she wrote, "I washed blood from uniforms all day. Some blood wasn't dry. Some belonged to boys who still breathed when they arrived and didn't when they left. I touch them gently, love, because I want someone to do the same for you if I ever lose you." That letter was never sent. Her fiancé died in a bombing before. It reached him, but decades later, their letters were reunited in a museum, placed side by side, words that never met in life, but that eternity brought together. These are the stories that aren't in history books, because they aren't about generals or battle plans. They're about a young man who drew hearts in the corner of his letter so his girlfriend wouldn't forget how he used to doodle during math class. They're about a woman who, in the middle of the siege of Leningrad, wrote, "I still put a little flower in the window every morning, even if no one passes by, even if no one sees it. I do it to remind myself that beauty still exists." These stories survive not because of their victory, but because of their humanity. And in each one, there's a common thread, the desire to return, not just to a place, but to a version of themselves, a version that smiled easily, that laughed at bad jokes, that believed in birthdays and surprises and summer nights that never end. That version often never came back, but they wrote, hoping that someone, somewhere, would understand. Maybe us, maybe you, maybe the person listening to this right now and thinking of someone they miss, because war takes many forms, and so does longing. Some letters never arrived, some were burned, some are still buried in the ground, waiting for someone to find them, but the ones we have, we carry, we read, we pass on, because forgetting them would be like letting them die a second time. And they deserve more than that. They deserve to be heard, to be remembered not as numbers, but as voices, as feelings, as people. So now we end this journey through their words, but maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of something new inside us. A respect, a silence, promise that we will never again look at war without remembering its true cost, that we will never again read a letter without thinking of the hands that wrote it, the lips that whispered it before sealing the envelope, the heart that beat faster. Every time a reply was late, we read these letters because they are alive, and while they are alive, so are the people behind them. Thank you for listening. If you felt something today, don't let it fade. Share this story. Subscribe to the channel. Because in a world that forgets so easily, your memory can be a form of resistance, and the voice of a soldier from the past can still echo in the hearts of those who choose to listen.